The world of wrestling, UFC, MMA. The grandiloquent truth of gestures on life's great occasion. The virtue of all-in wrestling is that it is the spectacle of excess. Here we find a grandiloquence which must have been that of ancient theaters. And in fact, wrestling is an open-air spectacle. For what makes the circus or the arena what they are is not the sky, parentheses, a romantic value suited rather to fashionable occasions. It is the drenching of vertical quality of the flood of light. Even hidden in the most squalid Parisian halls, wrestling partakes of the nature of the great solar spectacles. Greek drama and bullfights in both a light without shadow generates an emotion without reserve. There are people who think that wrestling is an ignoble sport. Wrestling is not a sport. It is a spectacle, and it is no more ignoble to attend a wrestled performance of suffering than a performance of the sorrows of Arnulfi or Andromache. Of course, there exists a false wrestling, in which the participants unnecessarily go to great lengths to make a show of a fair fight. This is of no interest. True wrestling, wrongly called amateur wrestling, is performed in second-rate halls, where the public spontaneously attunes itself to the spectacular nature of the contest. Like the audience at a suburban cinema, then these same people wax indignant because wrestling is a stage-managed sport, which ought, by the way, to mitigate its ignominy. I'll check that word in the dictionary later. I don't know. The public is completely uninterested in knowing whether the contest is rigged or not, and rightly so. It abandons itself to the primary virtue of the spectacle, which is to abolish all motives and all consequences. What matters is not what it thinks, but what it sees. The public knows very well the distinction between wrestling and boxing, and knows that boxing is a Jansenist sport based on a demonstration of excellence. One can bet on the outcome of a boxing match, which wrestling, it would make no sense. And a boxing match is a story which is constructed before the eyes of the spectator, in wrestling, on the contrary, it is each moment which is intelligible, not the passage of time. The spectator is not interested in the rise and fall of fortunes. He expects the transient image of certain passions. Wrestling, therefore, demands an immediate reading of the juxtaposed meanings, so that there is no need to connect them. The logical conclusion of the contest does not interest the wrestling fan, while on the contrary, a boxing match always implies a science of the future. In other words, wrestling is a sum of spectacles, of which no single one is a function. Each moment imposes the total knowledge of passion, which rises erect and alone, without ever extending to the crowning moment of a result. Thus, the function of the wrestler is not to win, it is to go exactly through the motions which are expected of him. It is said that judo contains a hidden symbolic aspect. Even in the midst of efficiency, its gestures are measured, precise but restricted, drawn accurately but by stroke without volume. Wrestling, on the contrary, offers excessive gestures exploited to the limit of their meaning. In judo, a man who is down is hardly down at all. He rolls over, he draws back, he eludes the defeat, or if the latter is obvious, he immediately disappears. In wrestling, a man who is down is exaggeratedly so, and completely fills the eyes of the spectators with the intolerable spectacle of his powerlessness. This function of grandiloquence is indeed the same as that of ancient theater. If you don't know what grandiloquence is, context clues. If you're a kid, look it up. You got the internet. I kind of figured out what grandiloquence is. Context clues. If you're a kid, look it up. You got the internet. I kind of figured out what grandiloquence means because I use context clues for the kids, whose principal language and props, masks, and buskins occurred in the exaggeratedly visible explanation of a necessity. The gesture of the vanquished wrestler signifying to the world a defeat which, far from distinguishing, he emphasizes and holds like a pause in music, corresponds to the mask of antiquity meant to signify the tragic mode of the spectacle. In wrestling, as on the stage in antiquity, one is not ashamed of one's suffering. One knows how to cry. One has a liking for tears. Each sign in wrestling, therefore, endowed with an absolute clarity, since one must always understand everything on the spot. As the adversaries are in the ring, the public is overwhelmed with the obviousness of the role. As in the theater, each physical type expresses to excess the part which has been assigned. To the contestant. I don't know what this word is right here. That's why I stopped. Thauvin. Thauvin. I don't know, maybe it's someone's name. I can't figure it out. Thauvin, a 50-year-old with an obese and sagging body. Thauvin? I don't know. Whose type of asexual hideousness always inspires feminine nicknames, displays in his flesh the characters of baseness. For his part is to represent what in the classical concept of the salade, the bastard, the key concept of any wrestling match, appears as organically repugnant. The nausea voluntarily provoked by Thauvin shows, therefore, a very extended use of signs. Not only is ugliness used here in order to signify baseness, but in addition, ugliness is wholly gathered into a particularly repulsive quality of matter. The pallid collapse of dead flesh. The public calls Thauvin la barbecue, stinking meat. So that the passionate condemnation of the crowd no longer stems from its judgment. But instead, from the very depths of its humors, it will thereafter let itself be frenetically embroiled in an idea of Thauvin which will conform entirely with this physical origin. His actions will perfectly correspond to the... I just want to give a shout out to Vans, Tin for hooking me up. for my latest video pop, skateboarding and BMX. Thanks for the Vans shoes. Peace. Back to business. His actions will perfectly correspond to the essential viscosity of his personage. It is therefore in the body of the wrestler that we find the first key to the contest. I know from the start that all of Thavin's actions, his treacheries, cruelties, and acts of cowardice will not fail to measure up to the first image of ignobility he gave me. I can trust him to carry out intelligently and to the last detail all the gestures of a kind of amorphous baseness, and thus fill to the brim the image of the most repugnant bastard there is. The bastard octopus. Wrestlers therefore have a physique as peremptory as those of the characters of the comedian dell'arte, who display in advance in their costumes and attitudes. I got a costume. Found it in the garbage just the other day. The bastard octopus. As those of the characters of the commedia dell'arte, who display in advance in their costumes and attitudes the future contents of their parts. Just as Pantaloon can never be anything but a ridiculous cuckold, harlequin and astute servant, and the doctor a stupid pedant. In the same way, Thavin will never be anything but an ignoble traitor, Rhaenyra's a tall blonde fellow with a limp body and unkempt hair. The moving image of passivity, Mazad, short and arrogant like a cock. That's like a little bird with long skinny legs. Y'all know what cocks are. They host cock fights down in Mexico. That of grotesque conceit, and Orsano, an effeminate teddy boy for an Orsano, an effeminate teddy boy first. Seen in a blue and pink dressing gown, that doubly humorous of a vindictive salope. Or bitch, for I do not think that the public of the Elise Montmartre, like literature, believes the word salope to be a masculine. The physique of the wrestler therefore constitutes a basic sign which, like a seed, contains the whole fight. But this seed proliferates, for it is at every turn during the fight, in each new situation, that the body of the wrestler casts to the public the magical entertainment of a temperament which finds its natural expression in a gesture. The different strata, I don't know what strata means. Maybe I'll figure it out. You guys figure it out there with me. Maybe you can comment. Hey, like me on Twitter. Join me on Instagram. That's bullshit. The wrestler. Oh, yo. Seed. Okay. I'm going to start this over. The physique of the wrestlers therefore constitutes a basic sign which, like a seed, contains the whole fight. But this seed proliferates, for it is at every turn during the fight, in each new situation, that the body of the wrestler casts to the public the magical entertainment of a temperament which finds its natural expression in a gesture. The different strata of meaning throw light on each other and form the most intelligible of spectacles. Wrestling is like a diacritic writing. Above the fundamental meaning of his body, the wrestler arranges comments which are episodic, but always opportune, and constantly help the reading of the fight by means of gesture, attitudes, and mimicry, which make the intention utterly obvious. Sometimes the wrestler triumphs with a repulsive sneer while kneeling on the good sportsman. Sometimes he gives the crowd a conceited smile, which forebodes an early revenge. Smiles are fucked up. Sometimes pinned to the ground, he hits the floor ostentatiously to make evident to all the intolerable nature of his situation, and sometimes he erects a complicated set of signs meant to make the public understand that he legitimately personifies the ever-entertaining image of the grumbler, endlessly confabulating about his displeasure. We are therefore dealing with a real human comedy, where this ain't no Tim and Eric shit. Tim and Eric are kings of their own dominion. Love those guys. Twisted. We are therefore dealing with a real human comedy, where the most socio-inspired nuances of passion, conceit, rightfulness, refined cruelty, a sense of paying one's debts, always felicitously, I don't remember what that word means. It's probably like a cat or something, like feline, claws at you, I don't know. Felicitously find the clearest sign which can receive them, express them and triumphantly carry them to the confines of the hall. It is obvious that at such a pitch it no longer matters whether the passion is genuine or not. What the public wants is the image of passion, not passion itself. An image. There is no more a problem of truth in wrestling than in the theater. In both, what is expected is the intelligible representation of moral situations, in which are usually private. I'm going to read that again. What is expected is the intelligible representation of moral situations, which are usually private. This emptying out of interiority to the benefit of its exterior signs. This exhaustion of the content by the form is the very principle of triumphant classical art. Wrestling is an immediate pantomime indefinitely more efficient than the dramatic pantomime, for the wrestler's gesture needs no anecdote, no decor, in short, no transference in order to appear true. Each moment in wrestling is therefore like an algebra which instantaneously unveils the relationship between a cause and its represented effect. Wrestling fans certainly experience a kind of intellectual pleasure in seeing the moral mechanism function so perfectly. Some wrestlers who are great comedians entertain as much as a Molière character because they succeed in imposing an immediate reading of their inner nature. Armand Mazad, a wrestler of an arrogant and ridiculous character, as one says that Harpagon is a character, always delights the audience by the mathematical rigor of his transcriptions, carrying the form of his gestures to the furthest reaches of their meaning, and giving to his manner of fighting the kind of vehemence, I don't know, it's a bullshit word, you know? Choose a different word, like what are you trying to fucking not make the kids understand? Will you write for adults? Kids, man. I don't fucking understand this shit. And precision found in a great scholastic disputation. When you use the word scholastic, you're just showing off. I'm liking what I'm reading. It's all good shit. But I don't understand a lot of these words, man. Great scholastic disputation in which what is at stake is at once the triumph of pride and the formal concern with truth. What is thus displayed for the public is the great spectacle of suffering, defeat, and justice. Wrestling presents man's suffering with all the amplification of tragic masks. The wrestler who suffers is in a hold with which is reputedly cruel. An arm lock, a twisted leg, offers an excessive portrayal of suffering. Excessive. Like a primitive pieta, he exhibits for all to see his face, exaggeratedly contorted by an intolerable affliction. The kids ain't gonna understand this. It is obvious, of course, that in wrestling, reserve would be out of place, since it is opposed to the voluntary ostentation of the spectacle, to this exhibition of suffering, which is the very aim of the fight. This is why all the actions which produce suffering are particularly spectacular, like the gesture of a conjurer who holds out his cards clearly to the public. Suffering which appeared without intelligible cause would not be understood. A concealed action that was actually cruel would transgress the unwritten rules of wrestling and would have no more sociological efficiency than a mad or parasitic gesture. On the contrary, suffering appears as inflicted with emphasis and conviction. For everyone must not only see that the man suffers, but also and above all understand why he suffers. What wrestlers call a hold, that is, any figure which allows one to immobilize the adversary indefinitely and to have him at one's mercy. Say uncle! Uncle, say it! Has precisely the function of preparing in a conventional, therefore intelligible fashion, the spectacle of suffering, of methodically establishing the conditions of suffering. The inertia of the vanquished, I know what inertia means. The inertia of the vanquished allows the temporary victor to settle in his cruelty and to convey to the public this terrifying slowness of the torturer who is certain about the overcome of his actions. To grind the face of one's powerless adversary, or to scrape his spine with one's fist with a deep and regular movement, or at least to produce the superficial appearance of such gestures. Wrestling is the only sport which gives such an inertialized image of torture. But here again, only the image is involved in the game, and the spectator does not wish for the actual suffering of the contestant. He only enjoys the perfection of an iconography. It is not true that wrestling is a sadistic spectacle. It is only an intelligible spectacle. There is another figure more spectacular still than a hold. It is the forearm smash. Classic. Classic. The forearm smash. In the forearm smash, catastrophe is brought to the point of maximum obviousness, so much so that ultimately the gesture appears as no more than a symbol. This is going too far. This is transgressing the moral rules of wrestling, where all signs must be excessively clear, but must not let the appears as no more than a symbol. This is going too far. This is transgressing the moral rules of wrestling, where all signs must be excessively clear, but must not let the